Gets. Welcome to California and rolling blackouts. Hey, thank you all for coming. It's so great to see such a good turnout. It's on such a very important topic, and I really do appreciate it. We're going to get into the issue at hand and have some guest speakers here tonight and talk about our position on making certain we maintain public order in Minnesota and this country. It's certainly a pledge that every candidate for any office should be in on. So I want to talk about that momentarily, but right now Emily Hartigan will lead us in the pledge. Where's Emily? There she is.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Emily. And we'll get into what that particular pledge means and what liberty and justice for all means before the night is through. But before, again, I get into the substance of the issue, I want to talk about a little bit about the men and women of law enforcement that are here tonight and that have given up their time, not to mention given a lot more in the cause of public order and keeping us safe and free. Bob Kroll, president of the Minneapolis Police Officers Federation, is here. Bob? Brian Peters, Executive Director of the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. Brian? Michael Gallagher, President of the Bloomington Police Officers Federation. Sean Gormley, Executive Director of the Law Enforcement Labor Services and former Police Chief of Corcoran. There's Sean. Cheryl Schmidt, Vice President of the Minneapolis Police Federation. Sergeant Anna Hedberg, Director of the Minneapolis Police Federation. Sheriff Sean Derringer, Wright County Sheriff. My old friend Rich Stanek, former Hennepin County Sheriff. And save the radio people for last. Stacy Braun, co-host of The Queen and the Cop Show, and he ran for Wright County Sheriff in 2018. Stacy, where are you? There's a famous document that we all are very familiar with, and it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal with certain unalienable rights. Among those are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted." That's it. To secure those God-given rights, we give the power of force to a government. To make certain that we use force to repel illegitimate force, so when the criminal is at your door, or another army is invading your country, our Declaration and that framework, that architecture of the Constitution enables us to keep us free and defend our life, liberty, and property. In fact, that was the phrase that Jefferson first wrote in the Declaration, life, liberty, and property, and they changed it to the pursuit of happiness. Unfortunately, as we've seen over the summer, our life, liberty, and property has been under assault. And it's been under assault without too many elected officials doing their first duty to stop the assault. Government isn't there to harm our life, liberty, or property. It's there to defend it. There is a moral, ethical, and legal obligation to do so. When you have politicians who stand down, when you have politicians who won't defend property, when you have $500 million in damages in Minneapolis and St. Paul, 1,500 buildings, it'll be the largest amount of damages in history in the United States from the riots we've seen. And unfortunately, they started here. And our failure to say, we all believe in justice, but that doesn't give you cause to take it into your own hands and riot and destroy property and threaten lives. And now it's escalated. Now it's escalated where people are actually having their homes threatened in suburban Minnesota, in rural Minnesota. It's gone across the country. where every night, all summer long in Portland, there's been an assault on law-abiding Americans who haven't done anything. It's out of control. It's out of control. It is not a privilege to call the police. It is a right, and we need to get back to that. We don't need to discuss all of the dangers of all the policemen and women in the world when you've got riders in the street wreaking havoc. We need to restore public order, the first object of government. And we haven't done it yet. Although we're making some progress. Yesterday in Denver, Colorado, after Antifa rioters looked for any excuse to destroy that city, the director of public safety and the mayor said, that is enough. These are not protests. These are not marches. These are not protests. These are riots. And they said enough. They're going to prosecute. We need to do that here. We need to do that in Minnesota. We should have done that in Minnesota, and I'll go a step further. We have a duty at the federal level under something called privileges and immunities guaranteed to every citizen to uphold the law. And if Minnesota won't do it, the feds may have to. I like to tell people I didn't know much about cops till I married one. And it's true. My wife Lee was a member of the St. Paul PD. Her dad was on the PD for 28 years. So I know a little bit about the life and death decisions they have to make in a split second. And I know a little bit about how tough the job is. What I don't know, and what she doesn't know, and couldn't imagine, was the idea that we would castigate every single man and woman in blue. The idea that we would deny them due process, deny them the presumption of innocence, and throw all of these people under the bus. And what's the result? People are rightly saying, understandably so, I don't want to do this job anymore. I've got to have support in my superiors, or I'm not going to do the job. And who does that hurt the most? The very people they're supposed to protect. After the riots in Minneapolis and St. Paul, I toured 12 to 13 businesses, most of them minority owned. Not one person said, I want to defund the police, I want to abolish the police, we need less police protection. They all said, where are the police? We need them. Well, you're not going to get the police. You're not going to get law and order. You're not going to get public order if you have a mayor and a governor who won't back them. And that is the first duty of these elected officials. And yet they don't do it. My opponent in this race, Tina Smith, calls for the continuation of quote-unquote righteous protests and went on the floor of the Senate to say we need to have a nationwide discussion across this country on the dangerous role police play in society. That's abdicating your duty. We need to have a discussion, all right. We need to have a discussion on what their idea of reimagining policing means. Well, you know what it means, and I know what it means. It means undercutting the cops. That's what it means. It means defunding budgets. It means fewer policemen and women on the street. That's not good for anybody. If the government can't get this right, its first fundamental duty, nothing else matters. It is the first duty of government to protect its citizenry and our lives and our liberty and our property. You know, we were moving in the right direction on a whole host of criminal justice reform bills. First Step Act. When I was in Congress, I authored the Juvenile Justice Reform Act. Hadn't been reauthorized in 15 years. We were all on board to make certain first-time nonviolent offenders weren't thrown in prison with hardened criminals. They got career and technical education training. We were on board with that. So what happened? What happened was justice got hijacked by a radical leftist group. And it's not just Antifa, it's a number of groups. These bricks in the street just don't appear magically every time there's a riot every night in Portland or Chicago or Denver or Minneapolis or St. Paul. This is an organized and in some ways an insurrection. This is attacking the very heart of what it means to live in a constitutional republic, what it means to live in a free country. And that's why I'm here to say loud and clear, you got one political candidate who backs the blue, and I'll do it. Not long ago, unfortunately, a candidate endorsed by Governor Walz, as well as the DFL, went up to Hugo, and I don't know what some people call this, but I know it wasn't free speech. It was an intentional attempt to terrorize a group of people in a neighborhood. And that's actually a tort under civil justice. When you are using the speech to intimidate, deliberately intimidate and terrorize and harass, it is no longer protected in that avenue. And we saw that. And we're going to see more of it. Because this is an attempt to silence anybody who doesn't agree with the Antifa left. This is an attempt to tell you you'd better conform, you'd better do exactly as we say, or we're coming to your house next. And that is precisely why government and public order and the protection of free speech is needed right now in Minnesota and across this country more than ever. It is being targeted. And this nation will not be anything any of our relatives, any of our parents, our grandparents recognize if we continue to go down this road. We need to get tough. We need to stop it in its tracks. We need to restore law and order. And again, if the officials of Minnesota refuse to do it, I'm going to do something about it when I get to the United States Senate. I promise you that. The notion that, finally, the notion that, and this is very, very disturbing, and you could say, I suppose, it started with Covington, or it started with a number of groups that didn't get the rule of law and due process and the presumption of innocence. But now to extend that over to the people that are there to keep our neighborhoods safe is quite frankly constitutional suicide. If we go down this road where we are denying the very basic, the rudimentary rule of law to the people we ask to uphold it in a very, very dangerous environment, we are not going to get the rule of law. We're not going to get, the next thing you know, you're going to have candidates for the United States Senate promising to end the filibuster and pack the Supreme Court until they get the rulings they want. Well, what do you know? We got those, and I'm running against one of them. This is an assault on everything we hold near and dear. The country is not mob rule. We separated from a monarchy, but do we not go to Madison's fear of going to a faction that would let 51% of the people do anything they want to the other 49%? We have constitutional checks and balances, horizontal checks and balances, vertical checks and balances, due process, the rule of law, all of those things designed to ensure everybody gets a fair hearing. The notion right now on the part of our opponents and the people in the street, and unfortunately, the Democrats who refuse to condemn them, is that some people don't get a fair hearing. Some people get subjected to the mob. That is not a state, nor is it a country you want to live in. So that is why today I asked everybody to come here, and I asked these men and women of law enforcement to come and say a few words, and why I feel so strongly about this. If we don't get this right, this first principle, nothing else matters. It is time to make certain the state and this country restores law and order, protects its citizens, and allows the police to do their job without condemning them at the first drop of a hat. That's what we need going forward, and that's what I intend to do in this campaign, and once I'm a U.S. Senator, to lend support to that. So, with that, let me make certain that I get everybody who wants a chance to speak an opportunity, because I think it's really important to hear from the people who are on the line in our efforts to restore the peace. So I think Bob is going to come up and say a few words, and then we've got Sean and State Representative Brian Johnson and a few others. Anybody, by the way, who was a member of law enforcement or is a member of law enforcement, you want to come up and say a few words, feel free. So Bob, come on up.
Thanks, everyone. I'm sitting here listening to what former Congressman, future Senator of ours is saying, and how can anybody, a rational person, defy what he just said? He touched on very many topics and nailed it on every one of them. This is about right versus wrong, period. The one thing from Minneapolis, our officers regret, and what bothers them most, is they weren't allowed to stop those riots that were going on. They would have been able to do it had the politicians above them not restricted them from doing it. Let's be clear about that. The Minneapolis cops, with the assistance of the National Guard that could have and would have deployed much earlier could have kept those enormous damages to a minimum. There's 1,500 businesses gone, over a $500 million, and that didn't have to be. That could have been shut down if we had what Jason is talking about, law and order and support from the top. That's a key component. Something that I thought about when I was listening to him talk here also is there's a duty to comply. That there's plenty of recourse to challenge officers' decisions, but to keep everybody safe, you've got a lawful duty to comply with lawful orders. I'm looking at that thing that occurred next door in Wisconsin, and I don't want to delve into the facts of it, but I do see the officers telling someone to do something and him trying to take control of the scene, walk away, do what he wants, go to a car, open it up. I'm speculating he was reaching for a firearm in there. But now we've got mob rule again, taking over. If that person would have complied with what he was told to do, we might not have had a person shot. That's just speculation, but I think as the facts shake out in that case, that'll be. But there is a duty to comply with. That's why we call it law and order. That's what our society is comprised of. That's what this nation is based on. So, you know, the Hugo thing really hits home because the main agitator there was from the east side of St. Paul, where I was from. And I'm thinking, how can this guy get elected in the area that I spent the first 25 years of my life? Which, by the way, I find it ironic when I hear the mayor talk about, we've got a mayor of Minneapolis talk about, we need to live in the city. The guy that moved here from the state of Virginia because the DFL party thought it'd be an easy place to plug him in. But I shouldn't be able to cross a river from St. Paul to Minneapolis to work. Go right down the list. Our governor, who's from Nebraska, you know, Ilhan Omar, who's from Somalia, Keith Ellison, who's from Detroit, they're all going to tell us where we need to live. Think about that for a minute. They can run the cities in the state, but they're going to tell you where to live. And then last, I'll wrap it up because I look around the room and there's a lot more speakers, a lot better speakers here than myself. But I was talking to Nathan Raditz earlier about the St. Paul thing, and that's where that main agitator came from, Mr. Thompson, who's running for House. This is an opportunity for all of us to work those people that are middle-of-the-road, common-sense Democrats that want law and order. So reach out to your friends, your neighbors that may be on the fence and go, this is about the future of our country. And think about kids coming up and stuff. So everybody, we got a couple months to get hard work here and make it happen. So thanks for having us. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Bob. Sean Gormley is Executive Director of the Law Enforcement, Labor Services, and former Police Chief of Corcoran. Sean, I know you want to say a word or two. Come on up.
Thank you, Congressman Lewis. Thank you all for being here today. It's important that we get our voice out. I was on a conference call with Bob today, and we had a discussion, and I'm kind of hitting and piggybacking on what Bob said. Law enforcement was told after the incident in May that we had to change, and law enforcement came to the table. I know that because I was at the table. I was at the table with representatives from the House and the Senate over at the Capitol in St. Paul, and we said, what can we do to help fix the problem? And we came to agreements, and they reached an agreement at the Capitol. But this is a bad marriage right now, and I say that we represent 6,500 members in the state of Minnesota. And this is a bad marriage because law enforcement is willing to change, but there needs to be both sides. So I asked Congressman Lewis when he gets to Washington, D.C. as our next senator, that he never lose sight of the fact that people need to understand that it's a two-way street. And like what Bob hinted on, when the police officer asks you to stop, stop. And if you have an issue with what is transpired during that interaction with the law enforcement, you can deal with it after the fact. But understand, we're in a very volatile time in our society here. Everyone's on edge. Mistakes are going to be made. Law enforcement's willing to be accountable, but we need accountability on the side of the public too. And believe me, I firmly believe the majority of the people out there today support the men and women of law enforcement, they really do. But we need to have that understanding that let the police do their job. You can conclude what you want to conclude after your interaction, but it has to be a two-way street. There can't be change on one side and not change on the other. So thank you.
Thank you. You know, what Bob and Sean just said is really important, because when you get public officials, superiors, who say, chaos is okay, mayhem is okay, we're going to have the police stand down in the 3rd precinct, we're not going to enforce law and order, guess what happens? Fewer and fewer people need feel the need to comply. Fewer and fewer people are going to say, I don't respect the police. And this thing escalates, and it's already escalated. And it escalated because in this place, in Minneapolis, it started with elected officials who did not do their duty, plain and simple. State Representative Brian Johnson, retired law enforcement as well. Brian, come on up, bud.
I want to thank all the officers that we have here today. I've worked blind like you guys. I know what you go through. And it's nothing compared to what you guys are going through now. Excuse me. This past session, we saw, actually it started last session, beginning of the first after the first year of the biennium. They started doing things, attacking law enforcement. And after the unfortunate incident in May in Minneapolis, things got a lot worse. What they did to Bob and Hugo is at your house, that was 100% uncalled for, and that meant that person should never be allowed to be a state representative. I'm calling for the DFL to remove their endorsement of that person. Mr. Thompson should never be a state representative. It was totally uncalled for what he was saying. I listened to the video. Was it felony level complaints? No, but there sure were some misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor offenses there, and he should be charged. Speaking of charges, with all those riots, I have a list of everybody that was arrested during the riots in Minneapolis. 3 days ago, I went through 25 of those names. 0 have been charged by the Hennepin County Attorney. Now, law enforcement can only do so much. They pick the person up, they do the investigation, decide if they have probable cause to arrest or not, and they send it to the county attorney's office if it's a felony level or above. And the county attorney makes the final decision. It took almost 2.5 months before they actually charged the person they had on video tear down a statue at the Capitol. And they had it on video. With the county attorneys we have in Minneapolis and Hennepin Ramsey County, they're doing a disservice to the citizens. They're making it less safe for them. Law enforcement can only do so much. They're the next step in the link in the chain. If they're not going to do their job, they should leave. Let the people who will do the job to protect the citizens, because every citizen has a right to be safe and secure in their home and in their community. And if you even decide to go for a walk in the park, you shouldn't be afraid to go do that. The more they let the criminals and the bad guys walk around and don't do anything, they get more emboldened, they do more and more. We saw that in the 1980s when the city of Minneapolis was called Minneapolis. Oh, by the way, we've surpassed those numbers already. And what did we do? We sent the state patrol in and some other help. We cracked down on not the high-level crime, it was the low-level crime, and that cleaned it up. There's a big push to not to charge any of the low-level crime. Guess what? That's emboldened them. So the guys on the street are doing the best they can with what they have to work with. I stand behind them 100%. And if you guys need anything, please feel free to call me. I'll help you anyway. And I want to thank Jason for what he's doing, because without law enforcement, it's vigilantism. And the next step would be to call the state and the federal government to come in and be the police department. We had a bill beginning of this session, that would have gave the Department of Corrections their own statewide police department to have full authority throughout the state. Now, if you check the readings of Karl Marx, the first thing that, one of the main things they need to do to get to socialism is to get rid of the police department. So with that.
Thank you, Brian. You bet. Thank you. I want to make certain anybody else here that would like to say a word or two, that's a member of law enforcement, has the opportunity. Anybody? All right, let me conclude, and then we'll go to a little Q&A. Anybody's got a question can, but I think it's really important what Brian said about broken window theory. If you don't think this could collapse very, very quickly, think again, look at New York and look at what's happening under de Blasio. Look what happened under Giuliani, as much as I hate to say it, Bloomberg. But the fact is, they enforced broken windows. And that theory says you stop it, you get the squeegee guys right away, and it doesn't escalate. It's breaking down in warp speed in New York City right now, and people are leaving New York City. And guess what? They're leaving Minneapolis and St. Paul too. And you know what? The danger is it's not going to stop there. It's going to de-escalate very, very quickly. It's not going to stop at Hugo either. When we give these people a green light, they're emboldened. They're going to move, and they're going to move very, very quickly. I want everybody in this room to think about how perverse it is that the cancel culture left, including my opponent Tina Smith, are more than eager to help big tech censor speech or to blast the president for divisive rhetoric when they are turning the other cheek over rioters and lawless criminals in the street committing violence. That's the perversity of the society we're going to be in if we don't stop this right now. So let's all get together. Let's all make certain we all do the best we can, including the men and women in blue. Well, let's make certain that we help them and not hinder them. I would say your life depends upon it figuratively, but your life depends on it literally. Thank you all very much. I'd be happy to take a question. Yeah, Rich.
Hey, Senator Trey Sumter. Where has Senator Tina Smith been these past several months? Well, all this has been going on. She has an incredible opportunity, a pulpit to speak to support the working men and women of law enforcement. Where has she been?
She's been throwing gasoline on the fire. It has been the greatest abdication of a public official I've seen in my lifetime. And that is to say, when you're in the midst of a riot, don't say continue the protest, the righteous protest, and make people feel uncomfortable. Her words, uncomfortable. You don't go on the Senate floor and say, we've got to look at all the riots in the street. We have to have a national discussion on the dangerous role police are playing. You don't say it's privilege to call the police, and therefore you shouldn't do it. You don't have a right to protect your life, liberty, or property. That's what she's been saying rhetorically. Some of it on the record, some of it in tweets, some of it in press releases. That is not leadership. That's a total abdication of leader. But I tell you, Tina Smith has a history and a problem with law enforcement, going back to the Dakota County Access Pipeline and undercutting her own governor when she was lieutenant governor on whether Homeland Security could get some law enforcement help to quell the riots up there. There's something going on there. I'm not quite certain what it is, but it's not helping Minnesota.
Jason, you have the leaders of the largest law enforcement organizations, associations, union, federation in the state in this room. And I heard some of them speak, but have any of them heard from her in the last several months?
No.
How about Amy?
No.
Where's the great Amy Klobuchar?
You know, it's funny. Some of us are almost as old as I am. Remember that famous 1964 speech by Ronald Reagan where he said, "This is a time for choosing," and he predicted the chaos of the 1960s and said, "You can't play this one down the middle. You got to choose." Man, oh man, does that hit home right now. Tina cannot parse this. She's not even trying to parse it. She's endorsing Ilhan Omar, and she's bashing police. It's not parsing anything, so she's chosen. You and I have to choose the right way, and that's to help our people out there enforcing the law. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I went to a Republican Meet the Candidates thing 2 years ago. And after listening to these people for a few minutes explaining themselves and talking, I left there knowing every one of them was going to lose, because there wasn't fire in any of them. The Republicans have a real bad habit here, and I'm not talking about you, but traditionally, their attitude has been, and if you'll pardon the metaphor, to bring a knife to a gunfight. The Democrats understand that you can say whatever you want, do whatever you want, lie like hell, because the day after the election, it doesn't matter. Now, I'm not looking for people to lie or not, but stand up to this nonsense.
That's right. Well, I agree. And look, I don't think anybody's ever accused Jason Lewis of not being fiery.
No, I know. Jason,
The great thing about running in greater Minnesota, as opposed to a suburban swing district. I get out in greater Minnesota and say, Jason, you're great, but you might be a little too moderate for me. There is a groundswell throughout Minnesota and now in the suburbs that says enough is enough. And that is why these polls, about 4 or 5 in the last month, has Minnesota in a dead heat between President Trump and Joe Biden and between Jason Lewis and Tina Smith. That means we're up.
It does.
And